This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom.
To achieve progress without strife, to achieve change without hatred.
We cannot expect to make everyone our friend, but we can try to make no one our enemy.
Let us create together a new national spirit of unity and trust.
How can we love our country and not love our countrymen? And loving them, reach out a hand when they fall.
To my friends, and yes, I do mean friends, in the loyal opposition, and yes, I mean loyal, I put out my hand.
I ask the Congress to join with me, but no president, no Congress, no government can undertake this mission alone.
Civility is not a tactic or a sentiment. It is the determined choice of trust over cynicism, of community over chaos.
On this day, we gather because we have chosen hope over fear, unity of purpose over conflict and discord.
It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric. We have to stop treating our opponents as our enemies. They are not our enemies, they are Americans.
It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good.
Today, Joe Biden steps into power as this nation's 46th president. For him, this moment has been a long time coming. 35 years in the U.S. Senate, 2 previous White House runs, 2 terms as vice president, and now the president-elect is about to become the president of the United States during a time that's even more tumultuous than when he assumed the vice presidency 12 years ago, dealing, like he did then, with a battered economy, this time because of a raging global pandemic amid an even more bitterly divided nation. Donald Trump will leave the White House today at 8 a.m. for the final time as president. And today at noon, Joe Biden takes the oath of office. Thank you for joining us on this historic day as we also prepare for the swearing in of America's first ever woman vice president, Kamala Harris. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have MSNBC national affairs analyst, executive editor of The Recount, and co-host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus, John Heilman. Chief White House correspondent for The New York Times, Peter Baker. Member of the New York Times editorial board, Mara Gay, and author, historian, and journalist, Evan Thomas joins us on this very important morning.
Well, it is a morning that every 4 years throughout our lifetime has been a morning where, as Barack Obama said in the inaugural address clip that we showed, that most Americans have chosen hope over fear. That has not always been the case over the past 4 years. And Willie, many of those promises of extended hands or efforts to reach out to the other party have fallen apart quickly. And we've especially seen it time and again over the past 30, 40 years as politics has become more toxic in Washington, D.C. These last 4 years, of course, have been especially toxic. But this is the morning. I can only speak for myself. This is the morning. This is the day when I have, throughout my life, done what Mark Thiessen, a conservative writer for the Washington Post, said he was going to do today, and that is look at the incoming president and say, I may not agree with him on everything. I may not agree with him on most things, but he is my president, and I hope he succeeds. It's what I said when Donald Trump was sworn in. It's what I said when Bill Clinton, probably the president whose election I was the most upset at the time. There's something about seeing a fellow American go up there and swearing an oath to this country where every American, be they conservative or liberal, black or white, Democratic, independent or Republican, has to understand that if the President of the United States does not succeed, then the United States does not succeed. And anyone walking around Washington, D.C., walking around Washington last night or this morning, has in front of them laid bare the effects of the past 4 years of this presidency, an abandoned city, a city that actually is shuttered up as if it is in the middle of a civil war, still buffeted from the violent, grim impact of what happened on January the 6th, and trying to look forward to a better, brighter 4 years ahead for all Americans, not just for Democrats.
Yeah, I share that sentiment exactly, and we said as much the day that President Trump was inaugurated. The success of a president is the success of a country. But today ends, for many people in this country, a very, very dark chapter in our history that began on June 16th, 2015, when Donald Trump descended that escalator at Trump Tower in New York City. Many people thought it was a joke at the time, his candidacy. It ended 2 weeks ago on the steps of those Capitol in a nightmare, in a riot, an attack on the United States Capitol. And this day is extraordinary for the reasons an inauguration is always extraordinary, which is it's the transfer of power, in this case to a new president, Joe Biden. But it's extraordinary also because the sitting president of the United States will not be there. He has decided not to attend. He continues the lie that he won the election. He will be leaving the White House on Marine One at 8 o'clock this morning. He'll travel to Joint Base Andrews in Maryland and fly out to Florida on Air Force One last time. So he will not be at this ceremony. Also, as you said, this will take place on the steps of the Capitol that was attacked 2 weeks ago, the very place where Joe Biden will take the oath of office. Trump supporters were standing and cheering and waving flags, some of them beating police officers and ransacking the Capitol building. It also takes place in a city that, as you said, is locked down. That's essentially on a war footing, and will look out over a mall and down to the reflecting pool that is a representation of where we are, a country that has lost more than 400,000 people to a pandemic that this president has vowed to take more seriously and to make the centerpiece of his administration in a way that the sitting president, who will be president now for just under 6 more hours, did not.
Yeah.
You know, Evan Thomas has set this for us historically. Of course, George Washington, the first president to be sworn in, and was sworn in New York. Thomas Jefferson in 1801, the first president to be sworn in Washington, D.C. I think it was Martin Van Buren and Andrew Jackson were the first 2 presidents to get in a carriage together and ride to Capitol Hill for the swearing-in ceremony, and that moment has provided great fodder for historians like you, whether it was the chilly ride between Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower, where hardly any words were spoken, or whether it was Eisenhower just trying to figure out how to deal with JFK during the transition, a guy more transfixed on a button that he could push on Eisenhower's desk that would bring Marine One anytime, and Ike looking down at him going, You have more things to worry about than that, son, basically. Whether it was Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, again, this is part of an unbroken tradition, which, of course, will be broken this morning as Donald Trump leaves Washington and Joe Biden rides to the swearing-in ceremonies by himself. Talk about this day.
Well, that ride is really important. And as you pointed out, I think it happened with Jackson and Van Buren back in the 1830s. John Adams beat it out of town. He was so mad at Thomas Jefferson that just like Donald Trump, John Adams got out of town and went to Baltimore, I think, on a carriage. But they began the tradition of riding together. And it's really such an important symbolic moment. You mentioned that Truman and Eisenhower rode together. They couldn't stand each other. Truman was mad at Eisenhower for showboating, saying he was going to go to Korea. And Eisenhower was mad at Truman because he thought that Truman was spreading rumors about Ike's affair with his driver, Kay Summersby, in World War II. So they were so hostile that they did not speak to each other. But, and here's the big but, they still rode in the car together. The public didn't know how much they hated each other. They saw something greater, which is that you have to make a show of unity at this moment. And they learned how to cooperate with each other. They were, very different guys, but they had a common cause, which was the Cold War and restoring America after World War II. And they were able to bury their differences and work together. Trump's not being here today is symbolic of what we have lost, and the sense of bipartisanship and the sense of having one country. Trump has done, I'm sorry to say, his best to undermine that, and it's up to Joe Biden to try to restore that however he can. And the one thing he has going for him, he's not the world's greatest speaker, he's not the most uplifting speaker, he doesn't even have more than half the country behind him, but he's a decent human being. And I think people sense that, and his decency, I hope, will carry us through this day and into the days coming.
Well, decency, many would say, is what is needed right now more than anything. And Joe, usually inaugural events are jubilant, and there's music and performances, and there will be, as well as the very solemn moment of the president taking the oath of office, the president-elect. But I think most of the jubilation, given the coronavirus and 400,000 dead, amid all the other problems, and the latest being the insurgency at the Capitol, that jubilation will be replaced with resolve and a sense of bringing our country back.
Yeah, there's no doubt Joe Biden's going to be inaugurated under difficult circumstances, but my God, Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural, of course, where he composed one of the greatest speeches in American history. Our friend John Meacham would call it American scripture, the second inaugural address. He did that. The country was recovering from the Civil War, of course. He was assassinated soon after. But even in this century, Woodrow Wilson didn't hold inaugural balls in 1913 because he thought America was, the situation was too solemn. FDR inaugurated 4 times, had one inaugural ball in 1933, didn't even attend that. And we have seen time and again presidents coming into the White House under the most difficult of circumstances. So Joe Biden, certainly a student of history and certainly a student of these institutions in Washington, D.C., understands exactly what he has to do. And at the top of the list, John Hyland, has to be declaring war on COVID. We're over 400,000 deaths. They had a solemn ceremony last night that was so moving. And let's just be really blunt here. Donald Trump has set the bar so low He has set the bar so low since the end of February when he knew about COVID and what it was going to do to America, but tonight it. That Joe Biden can do the basic things that Americans have been urging this president to do since early March and can make a difference. The big difference in the lives of Americans and the economy.
Morning, Joe. That ceremony last night was stunning, right? And beautiful and incredibly sad, and I think for a lot of people cathartic, and beyond the stagecraft of it, which was really quite something. And the performance, Leonard Cohen sung Hallelujah, sung beautifully. The brief remarks by the president-elect, I think for a lot of people, it just was a very stark illustration of the shortcomings of the outgoing president. And it's a thing that Donald Trump could have done. I don't mean the grandeur of it, but I mean the sentiments expressed. He could have done at any time over the course of the last 11 months, 10 months since COVID washed across the country. You never had a moment like this ever. In the middle of 400,000 Americans dying, you never had a moment where Donald Trump made even an effort to try to have a moment like what Joe Biden had last night, expressing that kind of emotion, that kind of sympathy, that kind of trying to give the country a moment to kind of reckon with the scale of what's happened here with this pandemic. And so, Joe Biden reaching for that moment, understanding, I think, obviously, that COVID is going to define his first year, at least, of his first term. And as you said, Joe, the bar is very low in that sense, both on the symbolic level, the rhetorical level, and on the level of basic competency in terms of trying to address the pandemic itself as a public health crisis. The bar is very low, but expectations, I think, are very high. And I think the one thing that Joe Biden understands is how steep this challenge is, where we stand right now with the vaccine, with the limited the botched rollout of the vaccine, the limited uptake of the vaccine, the vast infrastructure challenge of getting it out to the public. On one hand, it is a very straightforward thing. Getting jabs in arms, convincing the country to accept this vaccine, getting it out there as quickly as possible. It's a very straightforward challenge. It's not an easy challenge, though. And I think a lot of Biden's success in this first year is going to turn on that. If they can get this one big, giant, very hard, but very straightforward thing right, Joe Biden will be off to a very good start this year. If they fail at that, he's got a lot of problems to deal with, but if he fails at that, he's going to have problems. But I think that there's a clear-eyed sense of resolve and a sense of the scale of this issue in front of them, and they understand how much they're going to be graded at the starting point, just really on this one thing. I think that's part of why that ceremony last night, in addition to its emotion, it was also so symbolically apt, because it is going to be the big issue that's going to define his first term, at least the first part of his first term, to a large extent.
And Margay, another epidemic that turned into a pandemic had to do with racial animus across this country. The idea that out of many come one, e pluribus unum, that was shredded over the past 4 years. And there were times, there were polls taken where a majority of Americans said they believed their president was racist. And this is a guy, and I just quickly jotted this down, who began his campaign talking about Mexican rapists, moved on to a Muslim registry and a Muslim ban, something straight out of Germany in 1933-34. Of course, he said he couldn't trust a Mexican judge who actually was from Indiana, but his parents were from Mexico. The mocking and the attacking of Gold Star family because their son was a Muslim. Charlottesville, need I say more? The mocking of black-led countries, calling Hispanics breeders, telling women of color who were members of the United States Congress to go back home where they came from. I could go on. There's no need. We all know what he's done over the past 4 years. It's going to present quite a challenge, is it not, for this president, for this Congress, to bring Americans back together on not just issues of race, on all issues. So we move back towards that goal of being one country out of many, one.
Mm-hmm. You know, Joe, I'm someone who believes that racism is not just animus that kind of lives in the hearts of some people, but unfortunately in this country is our national inheritance and national shame. In order to really overcome it, we need to confront it. And I certainly believe that if racism and white supremacy were alone disqualifying for the holder of an office, then we would not have had Donald Trump become president. So I think we really need to start to reckon with the role that white supremacy has played, not just in this country, but in the past 4 years, in producing someone like Donald Trump. I don't think it would have been possible without white supremacy and without racism. And so I think it's really important that as we talk about unity and moving forward, we really start to confront that challenge. I think I'm very hopeful because when we saw what happened on January 6th, a lot of Americans of goodwill saw the true face of white supremacy and of Trumpism at its core. And so that's not what we want as a country, no matter where you are in the political spectrum. If you are somebody who loves this country, you want to confront this and overcome it. So Joe Biden has his work cut out for him, but so do we all. And I think, unless we actually root out this racism, we will never overcome this challenge. And we might find ourselves right back in the same position. Foreign countries, if you think about the Soviet Union, they know that this is our greatest weakness. That's why during the civil rights movement, they sought to exploit it and to exploit those tensions. They did the same thing with Donald Trump. This will happen over and over and over again. What is preventing us from coming together to fight our real enemies, like COVID, is racism. It is at the heart of what allowed Donald Trump free reign to terrorize the American people for 4 years. And it will continue to do so in other forms. It did so before Donald Trump. It will do so again unless we confront it and defeat it together.
Peter Baker, you every minute have covered the twists and turns of this administration. It strikes me as Donald Trump flies out over Washington today, just over an hour and a half from now on Marine One, leaving for Joint Base Andrews, and then takes off on Air Force One, that he will be flying over the wreckage of his 4 years, that he will fly over a city that is locked down because of a pandemic that he ignored, that he said out loud in an interview on tape to Bob Woodward that he always wanted to play down, and also a city locked down because of the threat from white supremacists, from right-wing groups that he encouraged, the flames that he fanned that led up to the attack on the Capitol 2 weeks ago. And all this just hours ago, right before he is leaving town, pardons and commutations for 143 people, including Steve Bannon.
America is about to not be great again.
The speech the fake media didn't want you to know about is now available for download. Hasta la vista, America is Trump's farewell address. Well, it's Trump's farewell address, imagined by Kurt Anderson and performed by Alec Baldwin. Available exclusively at atrumpfarewell.com. It's just 99 cents.
Shouldn't we be charging more?
We are not here to curse the darkness. We are here to light a candle.
I'm Chuck Rosenberg. On my podcast, The Oath, I talk with people who served with integrity and honor, men and women who light the way. This week, former Peace Corps Director Carrie Hessler Radelet.
One of the most important elements of service is humility on the part of the person who is serving. We don't enter the community to save people. If anything, we are saved ourselves through service.
Join me for Season 4 of The Oath, an MSNBC podcast. Search for The Oath wherever you're listening right now and subscribe. New episodes every Wednesday.
Yeah, Willie, that's exactly right. If you drive around the city right now, what you would see is the convergence of the crises that we have been enduring and now that Joe Biden inherits. You see the military in the streets of Washington. You see the Jersey barriers blocks and blocks away from the White House and the Capitol. The whole swath of downtown is blocked off to traffic. Bridges are going to be closed today. The last few days, those of us who live here have been listening to the helicopters overhead at a fairly constant pace. And last night you heard the bells of Washington National Cathedral ringing for those who passed away from the coronavirus. The day we reached the 400,000 death toll, a macabre and grim milestone, and the lights are ringing the reflecting pool at the Lincoln Memorial as President-elect Biden and Jill Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris and her husband did what the outgoing president never did, which is, as John pointed out, just a simple expression of national mourning to acknowledge the pain and the suffering that so many Americans have been through. And when the sun comes up today and Joe Biden takes the oath on the west front of the Capitol, in the same place those rioters, those mob members were at just 2 weeks ago, assaulting the literal counting of the votes to stop the democratic process. You're also going to see a fairly empty mall where there would normally be hundreds of thousands of people because of COVID, because we can't afford to have people in such close proximity. So today kind of brings together in very stark relief, a country in crisis and the scale of the challenges that await the new president.
So, Peter, should we be surprised by any of the names on that list of pardons and commutations last night? Obviously, the president has been out of sight for the last week, spending his final days in office holed up in the residence, holed up in the Oval Office with a tiny group of advisors deliberating, debating who should be on this list. Steve Bannon, of course, is the one that pops out, a guy who was at his side when he ran for president, a guy who was seen by some people, including the president, to have abandoned him in some ways. Should we be surprised that Steve Bannon got the pardon last night?
Well, a little bit, only because the president had seemed to be leaning against it just 24 hours earlier. But then over the course of yesterday had, a running argument throughout the day. Bannon himself weighed in, making his case. It's a surprise in a number of ways, not just because it's a controversial, high-profile pardon, but because Steve Bannon hadn't even gone to trial yet. Traditionally, pardons go to people who have been convicted and even have served their sentences in most cases, according to Justice Department guidelines. Bannon hadn't even gotten that far, so it short-circuited the prosecution before the lawyers even had a chance to go to court to prove their case. I was also struck by the paragraph in the White House announcement about Steve Bannon. It didn't make the argument that he was innocent. It didn't make the argument that he was repentant. It just simply said that he was a well-known conservative leader with a fine, political acumen, which is not the usual criteria for earning presidential forgiveness. But, I think that in the end of the day, the president has the power. He decided he wanted to use it. I think he has decided that people who have been prosecuted in the last few years, he identifies with them in the sense that he nurses this sense of victimhood, the idea that somehow he was persecuted unfairly or politically by all the various investigations that have been conducted. And therefore, he sees through that lens cases like the one against Steve Bannon. But, it's interesting because Steve Bannon isn't just, charged with lying to prosecutors or one of these other crimes that a lot of his other aides have been charged with. He's charged with fleecing Trump's own supporters by telling them that they were giving money that would be used for the wall that, in fact, was in some cases used for other purposes. That's Trump's own base that was being victimized here. And yet the president decided that for whatever reason, he wasn't going to allow that prosecution to go forward.
So, Evan Thomas, draw parallels, if you will, for us between Richard Nixon's final days and Donald Trump's. There is, that I can think of, no figure in American history whose final days were spent in a Nixonian state inside the White House in a bunker more so than Donald Trump. Of course, even, Nixon had Kissinger to force him to get down on his knees and pray with him, making Kissinger extraordinarily uncomfortable. Had Al Haig still running around trying to hold the ship together. Still had people around him. With Donald Trump, you had A man after the riots abandoned by his closest allies on the Hill, the Senate Majority Leader, banned by Twitter, banned by Facebook. This was the way he communicated to the outside world. Impeached for a second time. And for the most part, sitting alone inside the White House for the last few weeks with just a few final holdovers.
Well, they said that Nixon was kind of half mad at the end, but he had a moment of insight that I don't expect from Donald Trump. When Nixon left the White House, he gave a talk and he said, if you hate your enemies, it will destroy you. It was a little bit late for Richard Nixon to have this insight, because hating his enemies did destroy him, but at least he did it. At least he said that, and he said it as advice to his successors. I don't expect a moment of self-reflection like that from Donald Trump. We'll see, but I wouldn't hold your breath. Nixon was a horribly flawed person, but he did believe in the system in his own way, and he acceded to the inevitability of his own impeachment and resigned. Trump lives in a different place. Trump is in another world, not Nixon's world, just further out there.
Yeah, can we, John Heilman, before we go to break, we look at the United States Capitol, absolutely beautiful imagery. And I must say last night, and maybe it's because of the chaos that surrounded it 2.5 weeks ago, it was absolutely gorgeous last night, lit up during the ceremony. The COVID ceremony. But let's talk about what's going to go on inside of that Capitol in the coming weeks. Mitch McConnell yesterday came out and delivered a blistering critique of Donald Trump. Said that the rioters were lied to, that Donald Trump supporters have been lied to about the election, and that the responsibility rests with the president of the United States. Tell us what is going on there. It's not that Mitch McConnell is incapable of just saying something because it's the right thing, but many Washington observers aren't sure that they've actually ever seen him do that while in Washington, D.C. So what's the story behind the story?
Well, Joe, I think, we saw last week, of course, McConnell having the extraordinary thing of kind of letting, without dispute, not disputing in any way news reports, which many believe were sort of direct leaks, but he certainly was offered the opportunity to say they were untrue. These stories in the New York Times and elsewhere, that he believed that Trump had committed impeachable offenses, that he was happy he was being impeached, that he thought that this was the way to purge Trump from the Republican Party. And then we now come to this week. In between, we had McConnell not doing a snap Senate trial after Trump was impeached. And a lot of people speculated about whether that was a sign that maybe McConnell was trying to have it both ways, criticize Trump on background in big newspapers, but then not try to drive him out of public life by convicting him. Didn't have the trial over the weekend, which he could have done, which is what a lot of House Democrats and a lot of Senate Democrats wanted. Instead, he elected to wait and have this trial in this early part of Joe Biden's term. It's my view, based on my reporting and analysis, that McConnell knew full well that in the Senate, in order to get those 17 Republicans that he needs, those votes to convict Donald Trump, that doing a snap trial in the Senate would have offended their sense of due process, and that he knew that by waiting, the case against Trump would only grow more powerful, that more evidence would come out, we would see more video, the complicity of Trump as rioters, as insurrectionists testified to the fact that they had come to the Capitol in their minds on Donald Trump's orders, on Donald Trump's instructions, that would make a case more powerful against Trump, and that waiting would make it easier to convict him. And I think yesterday you saw McConnell take the next step. he effectively said yesterday that he, as you said, he came out and said, basically said that Donald Trump was to blame for what happened in the Capitol. He basically said, without saying these words, that he had in fact done what the article of impeachment says he did, incited an insurrection. And I think that was the clearest tip of the hand that McConnell intends to vote to convict Donald Trump, that he is not only opening the door, but encouraging other Republicans to do so. And I think what's happening behind the scenes, Joe, is that, as we know, what's Mitch McConnell's game? All he cares about is power. All he cares about is retaking control of the Senate in 2022. He is staring into the reality that many large companies and reliable Republican donors are saying they will not contribute to the Republican Party, to the Republicans in the Senate, because of the stain of what happened last week. We've seen many companies come out and say, if you voted against the certification of the Electoral College, if you were part of this failed coup attempt, we're cutting the spigot off. We're not going to write you those checks. McConnell recognizes that without money, a lot of it, he's not going to be able to get back in control of the United States Senate in 2022. So I think part of what's going on here is that McConnell understands that purging Trump is in the long-term political interest of the party, but getting over this hump that convicting Trump in the U.S. Senate would also be maybe the only way to get back on good terms with the donors that he so desperately needs if Republicans are going to be able to retake control of the U.S. Senate and put him in the job that he thinks is rightfully his, which is Senate Majority Leader again.
And Peter Baker proving once again that Donald Trump is his own worst enemy. As we went through the laundry list yesterday, as this is happening on the Senate floor, Donald Trump is letting the Wall Street Journal know that he's thinking about starting his own party to compete with the Republican Party, to split the Republican base. So any fear that Republicans may have, obviously, to vote against him goes out the window. And it is actually in their best political interest now, suddenly, with Donald Trump talking about starting the, quote, Patriot Party, to vote the way they should vote and impeach a president for committing insurrection against the United States of America, and then voting to ban him from ever being able to run for office again. And in so doing, actually helping themselves politically by ensuring that Donald Trump doesn't rip the Republican Party in half.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes. This week on my podcast, Why Is This Happening? I'll be talking with Kara Swisher about big tech, Donald Trump, and the future.
There's two things you have to separate. One is, should they have been allowed to do this to Donald Trump? And I think most people agree they are businesses. They don't want to do business with him anymore. It's a pretty basic thing. The second part is these platforms are so powerful that there's no other choices for people. This guy has broken the rules of these social platforms over and over again, and it's accelerated how he's broken them. He's like a drunk driver who's been driving drunk for a long time, and he crashed, and they said no longer, right? Why are we turning to billionaires to help us? Because this is where we're at, is that the legislators couldn't do anything about this guy. And it took two guys, Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg, really, and a bunch of others, you're right, to shut this down.
That's this week on Why Is This Happening? Search for Why Is This Happening wherever you're listening right now and subscribe.
Well, I think it's interesting because it could be obviously just an expression of his frustration, his exasperation as he's leaving the White House. It could be a threat. It could be his way of saying to them, if you vote against me, I will take my people and I will leave and you will lose elections as a result. Remember the last time a former president broke away from the Republican Party and created his own, it didn't go so well for the Republican Party. That was Teddy Roosevelt, created the Bull Moose Party in 1912, ran for president again on that ticket. The Republican incumbent, William Howard Taft, went down, and the Democrat Woodrow Wilson won. So, it's a good question. It's a good reminder, though, I think, to Republicans that Donald Trump never really saw himself as one of them. Remember, he switched his party, I think, 5, 6, 7 times in his lifetime. Democrat, Republican, Reform Party, Independent. He never had a lifelong affiliation with the Republican Party. And while these last 4 years he's governed from the conservative right, no question about it, he's always seen himself as an outsider. That was the word he used just yesterday in his farewell video. He never really saw himself as a leader of the Republican Party. You saw at that rally, for those people who went and stormed the Capitol, Donald Trump Jr. Excoriating traditional Republicans, saying it's not their party anymore. It's Donald Trump's party. That's what he said, is Donald Trump's party. Not a party of ideas or a party of values or a party of shared beliefs. the president's son was defining it. And so that's what you're seeing here, I think. And I think it could have remarkable consequences for the Republican Party. He may not go through it. It's just his expression of anger, perhaps. But it reflects the civil war going on in the Republican Party right now, and the moment of testing. What do they want to be as a party? Whose party is it anyway?
Well, we have a packed show on this Inauguration Day, including President-elect Joe Biden's pick for Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Also, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright will be our guest, and Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn, whose crucial endorsement changed everything for the Biden campaign during the Democratic primaries. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
The mob was fed lies. They were provoked by the president and other powerful people. And they tried to use fear and violence to stop a specific proceeding of the first branch of the federal government, which they did not like. But we pressed on. We stood together and said an angry mob would not get veto power over the rule of law in our nation, not even for one night.
Excuse the emotion, but when I die, Delaware will be written on my heart. And the hearts of all of us, all the Bidens. We love you all. You've been there for us in the good and the bad. You never walked away. And I am proud to be a son of Delaware. And I am even more proud to be standing here doing this from the Major Beau Biden facility. Ladies and gentlemen, I only have one regret. He's not here, because we should be introducing him as president.
President-elect Joe Biden speaking yesterday in Wilmington, Delaware, before heading to Washington to begin the inauguration proceedings. Joining us now in Washington, NBC News correspondent Mike Memley. Mike, set the scene for us today.
Well, Mika, as you know, Joe Biden aspired to the presidency for most of his adult life. He ran for president in 1988, 2008, unsuccessfully. These are certainly not the circumstances in which Joe Biden maybe wanted to inherit, the massive challenges that are ahead. But as I've been talking with Biden friends, allies, former and current staff, they all say the same thing, which is if there ever was a moment that called for Joe Biden, it really is this moment. And when you saw the scenes yesterday when we were in Wilmington, the emotion just on display there, the dramatic pictures on the National Mall last night as we had really the first major national commemoration of the 400,000 lives lost, you're reminded of what Biden campaign said throughout the campaign, which was empathy is his superpower. And yes, this is not the inauguration Joe Biden might have drawn up. Of course, the security precautions, as you can see all around me here near the church where Biden will attend Mass this morning, the COVID protocols as I'm wearing a mask, and the socially distant mall where we will see the inauguration today. But think about the first time Joe Biden took the oath of office as a senator. That was not the swearing in he envisioned. It was not in the well of the U.S. Senate, surrounded by his family, but at the hospital bed next to his son, his two boys who were injured in that accident that also killed his wife and daughter. Now, Biden is beginning, you think of the notes he's been setting over the course of these inaugural proceedings. I find it so interesting that he is beginning his day not just attending Mass, and remember the history here, Joe Biden will become just the second Roman Catholic to be the president of the United States, but inviting the bipartisan leadership of Congress to join him. He, of course, has made many promises and issued his confidence, among other things, that he can bring the country together. He's appealing to a higher power this morning to help him do that as he attends Mass with those congressional leaders. And then it's off to the Capitol for that swearing in, a message of unity as we expect in what should be a 20 to 30 minute inaugural address. And then, guys, he's going to get to work. As soon as he gets to the White House, We expect him to issue 15 executive orders, introduce legislation for a immigration reform bill, and then just the beginning of what advisors say will be a very busy, not just first day, first week, but first 100 days in which he tries to address all these crises facing the nation.
Mike Memley, thank you very much. It's great to see you on this morning. We appreciate it. I hope to catch back up with you soon. Willie, obviously the question is, what is that address going to look like? Of course, we've had famous words uttered from presidents' inaugural addresses. Of course, John Kennedy's ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Abraham Lincoln, with malice toward none, with charity toward all. And of course, your favorite line and my favorite line, coming from behind the podium 4 years ago.
I know where this is going.
George W. Bush. That was some weird stuff. And he was a prophet. He was a prophet. What do you expect of us to hear from Joe Biden today? Nothing quite that prophetic, I know, but it does remind us about George Bush. It's good having George Bush around.
Yeah, he had some good political insight that day. He saw it all coming as he had that poncho sort of arranged somehow over his head. The theme today from Joe Biden is going to be unity, and that's a very broad theme, but these speeches are very broad. That's the way an inaugural address goes. There's, thank you for the helpful visual. There's President Bush 4 years ago, where he is reported to have turned to Hillary Clinton after President Trump's inaugural address, and as Joe said, uttered the words, "That was some weird stuff." But Mara Gay, the theme of unity obviously is a balm to many people's souls after the last 4 years when we felt so divided. But as you were talking about, there has to be some reconciliation that comes with the unity. A number of executive actions today, an ambitious $1.9 trillion package that he is talking about pushing through Congress to attack COVID, to get the economy back on track. What would you like to see from this president, not just in these first days, but as we move forward beyond the broad theme of unity, which is welcome, but as we get down in the weeds more specifically?
Yeah, I think that package, that COVID relief package, is a great start. One thing that we would really like to see, though, is aid to the American people that doesn't have an expiration date on it. I think when you look back at the 2008 crisis, the mistake that we made, one of the mistakes, of course, was not giving enough aid in the form that people needed for long enough. So, people need to pay their rent every month. And this is a crisis that has been going on for nearly a year in the United States now. It's going to continue. It's a deep crisis. People are sick. They are out of work. They need help for the duration. And so I think our hope is that this relief package, we can take the expiration date off of that and just kind of get help to the American people as they need it. That will also, I think, provide some stability in the markets, certainly, but also in people's lives. And I think that's the kind of stability that we need if we're going to rebuild the middle class and also rebuild these bonds of trust between Americans. I think that the focus needs to be not just on unity, but on recommitting to democratic traditions and institutions and strengthening those institutions and those bonds between Americans. The best way to do that is what Joe Biden is talking about doing on day one, what he's expected to do, which is getting help to the American people right now.
And Peter Baker, Joe Biden is going to be trying to do something that the last two presidents have had difficulty doing, Barack Obama, especially in his last 6 years, and Donald Trump over the past 4 years, and that is to pass a good bit of legislation that can't be reversed by a president's signature. I mean, this morning, Joe Biden can reverse so much of what Donald Trump did in his executive orders by just signing his own executive orders. So what is a Biden administration looking at as far as their opportunities go for a Congress that actually is more split down the middle than any time in our lifetime? We have in the United States Senate a 50-50 split. In the House of Representatives, 4 members, 4 Democrats, provide the margin of difference. But that actually is negligible, considering you have 435 members there. So we actually have, despite the heated rhetoric, this is actually the most centered, moderate Congress and president that we've had at the same time for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, look, the new president will show energy and action by signing these 17 executive orders and memoranda today. But he knows better than anybody, or at least as well as anybody, that you live by executive order, you die by executive order, right? The reason why President-elect Biden can undo so much of President Trump's administration on day one is because President Trump did do so much through his own unilateral executive authority, and that is instantly reversible, or at least very quickly reversible in most cases. And so Joe Biden, a creature of Congress, really the first true creature of Congress in the White House since Gerald Ford, knows better than anybody that if you want to make change that lasts, if you want to make change that matters, you really have to do it through laws that are passed by both houses and signed by a president. That's why I think he's unveiling today his immigration plan to provide a pathway to citizenship for 11 million people who are in the country illegally. That's a way of at least signaling from the beginning that, yes, he's using executive pen, but he's also planning to work with Congress to do big things. Now, can he? I don't know. You're right to point out how divided and how narrow these Democratic majorities really are. 50-50 Senate is not conducive to big sweeping change. I think that Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell are the kind of politicians who don't want to have a train wreck on debt ceiling, on government shutdowns, on COVID relief, things that are of urgent, immediate necessity. But I don't know that means that they can come to agreement on things like, sweeping climate bills or gun control or health care bills or things that really challenge the Republican orthodoxy of the moment. And I think that that's going to be a hard thing for President-elect Biden, because he's going to then have to explain to his base why he can't give them everything that they want, even though Democrats in theory control both houses of Congress.
Hi, it's MSNBC's Hayes Brown. These days there's just so much news to wrap your head around, it's challenging to get a deeper understanding of things. So every morning, go beyond the headlines with MSNBC Daily. It features written perspectives from people you know and trust, including Trymaine Lee, Mehdi Hassan, Liz Plank, and Frank Figliuzzi. They'll take you inside the most important issues of our times. Issues like systemic racism, domestic terrorism, and how we can bridge our political divide. Plus, you'll get a fresh take every morning from me. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.